Today we're building the ultimate way to experience GTA San Andreas in 2026 using a carefully selected set of mods that modernize the game without losing what made it legendary. We'll upgrade mechanics, bring the world to life, and enhance the visuals. Let's start with the foundation. The first thing we need is a city that actually feels like a city. Not just pedestrians walking around, but a place that feels active and inhabited wherever you go. Urbanize tackles exactly that by adding hundreds of new NPC actions across the game, making the world feel more active, more populated, and far more believable. With over 20,000 new objects already placed throughout the map, the result is a denser, more lived-in San Andreas. With that in place, let's now focus on improving the visuals. First, we have Rosa Project evolved. This overhaul rebuilds the textures across the entire world. Streets, buildings, roads, interiors, but without changing what makes San Andreas feel like San Andreas. It simply looks clearer, like the world has finally come into focus after years of blur. Then we bring in real linear graphics combined with reshade. It actually took me quite a while to decide which visual approach to use here. I looked through several different options, including RenderHook and DirectX 3.0, but those felt a little bit too drastic for what we're trying to achieve in this video. In the end, I decided to go with this combination for one simple reason. It offers a much better balance between visual quality and compatibility, doesn't hurt performance at all, and as more mods get added to the setup throughout this video, stability becomes a lot more important than going for a more extreme visual overhaul. In addition to the new looks, let's also add Real Skybox, a mod that swaps the old clouds for real sky photography. With this mod, the sky instantly looks more natural, especially during sunrise and sunset. With that in place, it's time to make the world react and behave more realistically. Let's start with Real Traffic Fix. This mod reworks the way traffic works across San Andreas, making cars feel less rigid, less robotic, and much closer to something you'd expect from a living world instead of an old scripted system. Now, here's where things get interesting. We all know how bad vehicle damage is in these older GTA titles. You could slam into a wall at full speed, and the car would barely look damaged. That changes completely with Vehicle Deform. Now crashes feel far more believable. The metal bends depending on the angle of the impact, hoods fold in, doors get crushed, bumpers twist, and every collision looks different. Another area of the game that feels very limited is the way pedestrians react to impacts. Whenever someone gets shot or hit by a car, the animation is always the same stiff fall sequence we've seen hundreds of times. With Ragdoll bullet physics, that entire system changes. This mod introduces a fully functional physics simulation directly into GTA San Andreas. Characters now react dynamically to bullets and vehicle impacts, with their bodies responding to force, direction, and momentum. Next step in the list to achieve full immersion is the first-person mod. Instead of watching CJ from a distance, you can now experience the world directly through his perspective, aiming, driving, and moving through San Andreas without the usual third-person separation. You're no longer just positioning a character on screen, you're lining up the shots yourself. What's surprising is how natural it feels in San Andreas. After a few minutes, it stops feeling like a mod and starts turning into a completely new way the game can be experienced. Next up is something that also deserved a proper overhaul: melee combat. Before, you could spam the same combo, pedestrians would eventually fall over, and that was pretty much it. No real resistance. Combat Melee Overhaul shifts that dynamic. Fights don't end in a few seconds anymore. You can't just mash buttons and expect everything to collapse in front of you. Opponents stay standing, they interrupt you, and they push back. Suddenly, even a random street fight demands a bit more attention. Another simple but very immersive addition is weapon recoil. With this mod, every time you fire, the crosshair will kick upwards, forcing you to actively control your aim. The recoil isn't random either. It's dynamically calculated and varies depending on the weapon. Faster weapons become harder to control, while more precise ones behave differently, adding a subtle but noticeable layer of realism to gunfights. Now we move into a different area of the game: the animations. San Andreas already has animations that fit its identity perfectly, but when you compare them to modern titles, you can clearly tell they come from a different era. After spending some time looking for animation upgrades that wouldn't break the game's immersion, I eventually came across these GTA 5-style animations. They're clearly well made, movements feel smoother, and CJ behaves much closer to how characters move in modern GTA titles. But the more I tested them, the more they started to feel slightly out of place in San Andreas. Not bad, just different. And since the goal of this video is to push realism while still staying close to the original experience, this might be a step a little too far. so for now, I'm leaving them disabled. CJ was always criticized for not being able to climb ladders in the game. For years, it became almost a running joke. You could take over entire cities, fly jets, start gang wars, but somehow, a simple ladder was impossible. With this addition, that limitation is finally gone. CJ can now properly grab onto ladders and climb them like you'd expect. It's a small change on paper, but it removes one of those strange gaps that always felt like missing. Now moving up to a different topic, let's change the way pedestrians react to being shot. In games like GTA 4 and 5, characters can get injured, fall to the ground, bleed, and sometimes even try to get back up or run away. San Andreas never really had that kind of reaction. With the Injured Animations mod, gunfights start to behave a bit more like that. A non-lethal shot can now knock someone to the ground instead of them just shrugging it off, adding a more dynamic layer to combat. I also added a similar touch for CJ himself. When his health gets low, he'll hold his stomach as a small visual cue that he's injured. Next up is another small detail that helps the game world feel a little more logical. Have you ever noticed how it makes no sense for an old woman to run as fast as every other pedestrian in the game? With Pedrun Fix, that odd detail finally changes. Pedestrians who are meant to be slower now move accordingly, and when they panic, their reactions feel far more natural instead of everyone sprinting away at the exact same speed. And now, beyond mechanics and physics, the environment itself also needed a few upgrades. After spending enough time in San Andreas, you start noticing that some parts of the game can feel a little repetitive. To start addressing that, first I added Original Peds Vary. Now, instead of constantly running into the exact same pedestrians everywhere, this mod gives almost every pedestrian in the game its own set of visual variations. The same character models can now appear with different faces, outfits, and combinations, making each pedestrian feel slightly unique instead of looking like the same person repeated all over the map. Another feature that wasn't really present in the older Grand Theft Auto games, at least not in a meaningful way, was wildlife. Thanks to the Animal World mod, the countryside of San Andreas finally feels inhabited. Animals can now be found roaming across forests, hills, and rural areas throughout the map. The result is that the remote parts of the world no longer feel like empty terrain between cities, but like actual wilderness that exists on its own. A different issue I always had with San Andreas is that the map feels massive, but most of it exists only at the surface level. You can explore the streets, sure, but when it comes to buildings, almost none of them actually serve a purpose. That's where enterable hidden interiors comes in. It doesn't make every building accessible, but it brings back interiors that were already part of the game, places that were used in cutscenes or left unused during development, and places them back into the world in locations that make sense. Because of that, you'll start noticing many more yellow markers across the map, leading into interiors that were previously impossible to enter. Now let's rework a few locations to make the map feel less empty. First is Santa Maria Beach. In the original game, it's mostly just empty space, a wide stretch of sand with barely any detail and very little activity. Realistic Beach makes the area finally feel like a place people actually spend time in. Umbrellas are scattered across the sand, more pedestrians walk along the shore, and small groups of people gather near the water. Right next to the beach, the pier has also been expanded, giving the whole area a bit more structure and activity. The Ferris wheel is now fully animated, constantly spinning and immediately drawing attention to the boardwalk. On the other side, we now have a carousel, adding another small point of interest that fits naturally with the atmosphere. Moving up to the countryside, we also have lively trailers. This mod noticeably transforms the trailer park areas. Some trailers now feature accessible interiors, and in certain cases, actual residents living inside. We'll also be adding a few extra props to the Shady Creeks area near Mount Chiliad, just a few additional objects to make this part of the map now feel less like unused space. Moving up to the desert, we're installing a wind farm inspired by the real ones found across California. And since turbines like these already existed way before 1992, they fit naturally within the game's timeline. Heading into Las Venturas, the real baseball field mod brings the stadium to life. A full game is now being played on the field, with a crowd in the stands reacting and vehicles parked around the area. Instead of feeling like a static location, the stadium now looks like a place where an event is actually taking place. Up along the northern coast, Beach Club Safe House introduces a new purchasable property near Bayside, a beachfront club that works as a safe house. It blends naturally into the coastal area and gives us another reason to spend time in the far north of the map. Speaking of properties, we can also expand the list of buildings available for purchase. With the Buy Property mod, the number of available properties expands across the map, giving you far more places to buy and own. And as an addition to that, I also implemented a furniture customization system. Once you purchase a property, you're no longer stuck with the same interior every time. You can place furniture around the house and shape the space however you like. Continuing with the world revitalization, there's one mod that completely changes how San Andreas looks at night: Project 2 DFX. In the original game, streetlights and other light sources fade out just a few meters in front of you due to the game's limited draw distance, leaving large parts of the map looking strangely dark when looking toward the city. This mod fixes that by keeping street lamps, building lights and traffic lights visible from much farther away instead of disappearing just ahead of you. The result is a nighttime world where the map finally feels as large as it actually is, something that becomes especially noticeable when you're looking at the city from higher ground. Of course, we can't talk about San Andreas without talking about the vehicles, so let's focus on them next. First off, we have the revamped vehicle project. Instead of replacing the original vehicles with completely new models, this mod focuses on refining and fixing the ones already in the game. It includes hundreds of corrections to the base vehicles, and cars now feature functional elements like reverse lights, proper emergency lighting, and other small details that were missing before. To expand the ways you can get vehicles, there's also the used car dealership mod. Rather than just relying entirely on random cars you find on the street, you can now visit a dealership in Jefferson and see what's available that day. The selection changes regularly, along with the prices, so every visit feels a little different and less predictable. Once you get behind the wheel, though, the driving still feels a bit too simple. So let's make this part of the game a bit more realistic, starting with the fuel mod. With this mod, vehicles no longer run endlessly without consequence, as both cars and bikes now rely on gasoline to keep moving. Gas stations appear across the map, and you can refuel by pulling up next to any pump. But what makes this mod unique is that fuel consumption also reacts to the way you drive. Flooring the accelerator or revving the engine while standing still drains the tank faster. Another subtle change that makes driving far less predictable comes with the tire damage mod. Now, when you crash or get caught too close to an explosion, there's a real chance one of your tires won't survive the impact. Instead of continuing like nothing happened, you're suddenly left trying to control a car with a blown tire, while the handling becomes unstable until you repair it. But adding wheel damage without a way to deal with it wouldn't make much sense. If anything can happen on the road, then there also needs to be a way to handle it. Spare tires gives Carl a simple solution: a spare wheel stored in the trunk. If one gets destroyed, you can grab it, place it next to the car, and wait as he kneels down and replaces the damaged wheel. Have you ever noticed how traffic almost never uses dirt roads? It's not really a logic issue. It's simply how the game was originally programmed. Cars on Dirt fixes that. Traffic can now appear on many of those dirt roads, moving through areas that previously felt almost untouched. As a result, the countryside feels less empty, especially in places that used to seem completely abandoned unless you were the one driving through. Another feature that the original game never had but other GTA titles later introduced is a functioning car wash. With this mod installed, car washes are no longer just decorative buildings on the side of the road. You can actually drive in and have your vehicle cleaned properly. The Packer truck has always been in the game, but actually using it the way it was intended never really worked properly. We'll be bringing that feature to the game thanks to the Attach Vehicles to Packer mod, which finally makes vehicle transport behave the way you'd expect. So far, we've focused on mechanics and the environment. Now let's shift toward the everyday life side of the game. Rules mod expands how traffic violations work while driving. Reckless speeding, using emergency vehicles without the appropriate outfit, or ignoring basic road rules can now attract police attention. There's even an optional feature where running red lights or driving on the wrong side of the road can alert nearby officers, if you prefer a more strictly realistic experience. Police behavior also gets a small but important fix with the Fair Police mod. In the original game, officers often ignore situations where NPCs attack you in the middle of the street, even though they react immediately if you're the one attacking someone else. With this mod, nearby officers will now respond to the aggressor instead of acting like nothing is happening, making police reactions feel much more logical. But when the police are after you, it feels pretty unrealistic that your only choices are to either escape or start shooting back. So I added a mod that lets you surrender whenever you have a wanted level, giving yourself up on the spot and skipping the whole process of losing the cops when you just don't feel like dealing with it. With all these systems in place, it only makes sense to have more things to actually do around the map. Several side missions originally seen in Liberty City and Vice City stories now appear throughout San Andreas, creating new ways to earn money and spend time in the world. You can work as a car salesman, patrol the beach, operate a fire helicopter, perform air rescue missions, or take on trash collection duties. They don't replace the original content, they simply expand it, adding more variety to everyday gameplay. And it gets even better because I also added a new activity that lets you buy and develop your own farm. Once acquired, it begins as a modest operation with a few workers and basic grain equipment. Over time, the property can gradually expand, bringing in more staff, adding new vehicles, introducing tractors, and eventually running the fields with a full combine harvester. Now back on the streets, there's one thing that always felt strangely absent. In a game so focused on gang culture, it's surprising that you couldn't properly ride with your homies in the back of trucks. Now gang members can pile into pickup trucks and similar vehicles, allowing you to move around the city with a full crew in the back. Urban life also gets a small but interesting addition with the skateboard mod. A fully usable skateboard now appears in the game, working both as a form of transportation and as a melee weapon. What makes it particularly interesting is that it uses assets that were already hidden in the original game files. Skateboards were actually planned for San Andreas at some point, but never fully implemented. This essentially brings that idea back and makes it functional. You'll also start noticing skateboards around the skate park, which helps the area feel more believable and active. Saving your game has worked differently across the GTA series. In the 3D universe, we had the classic floppy disks, or CD icons placed inside safe houses. And in the HD era, the mechanics shifted towards something more natural and realistic: sleeping. This idea now makes its way into San Andreas. Rather than simply stepping into an icon, you can now lie down in your safe house and fall asleep to save the game. Navigating the world also becomes a bit clearer with the More Radar Icons mod. More Radar Icons expands the map with additional markers for places that are actually accessible: stores, bars, hospitals, police stations, clubs, and several other interiors across the city. Now let's move on to combat, which is something we haven't really covered much yet, so it's time to improve that. Combat FX Upgrade brings more clarity and impact to combat visuals. Explosions, muzzle flashes, and fire now stand out with sharper effects. The difference becomes especially noticeable during shootouts, where gunfights feel more intense without drifting into exaggerated visuals. The overall style still matches the original look of San Andreas, just with a cleaner and more modern presentation. You probably also noticed that CJ's camera has been changed. Advanced Aim mod shifts the camera closer to CJ while aiming, creating an over-the-shoulder perspective similar to what later GTA titles use. I have to say that even though this might seem like a small change, it makes the game feel dramatically better and far more immersive. To finish off the weapon changes, I'll add a subtle add-on that replaces the classic floating pickups with actual weapons placed on the ground. Instead of glowing icons hovering in midair, you now see the weapon model itself where it was dropped. And that's about it. Subtle, but more realistic. The final upgrades focus on the game's sound design, pushing the immersion even further. Back in 2004, many of the game's sound effects had to be compressed to save disk space. Uncompressed SFX restores those sounds to a much higher quality. The difference isn't flashy, but it's noticeable. Rain will also get some improvements as part of our overall sound design upgrades. Rain Audio Fix replaces the original thunder sounds, which were never particularly convincing, with a more realistic thunder audio sequence. Instead of the sharp, repetitive thunder effects from the base game, storms now sound fuller and more natural. And now, one of the most ambitious audio upgrades for San Andreas: Sound Eyes. This mod introduces a modern way for the game to handle and reproduce sound, similar to the kind of audio systems used in newer games. Because of that, ambient audio becomes far more layered, and different effects interact with the environment in a way that gives the world a stronger sense of space. Moving on to the final mod of this video, we have a vehicle sound overhaul that dramatically improves how cars sound on the road. Engines now have far more character. Acceleration feels more natural, revving is less repetitive, and different types of vehicles finally have their own distinct audio, meaning driving starts to feel more varied depending on what you're behind the wheel of. Cruising through the city, speeding down the highway, or pushing a car to higher speeds all become more convincing because the audio now properly matches the sensation of driving. And that brings us to my definitive way to play GTA San Andreas in 2026. Carefully upgraded to feel more detailed, more immersive, and more complete, while still staying true to the original. Every change was made with that goal in mind, not turning it into a different game, and not overhauling it beyond recognition, but simply making the world behave in a more believable way. A more realistic version of the classic, built for 2026.